Special United Nations Green Ambassador Gérard Nsengiyumva, Special United Nations Green Ambassador Gérard Nsengiyumva, Special United Nations Green Ambassador Gérard Nsengiyumva in Kigali City, the Republic of Rwanda. This is video number 5 that is part of module 2. So the learning objectives for module 2 are to explain the standards for all humanitarian actors and explain the standards for all protection actors. So we started by defining professional standards. The basis of these guidelines is the Code of Conduct of the ICRC movement, including humanitarian principles. They govern the way humanitarian response is carried out. They are the basis of humanitarian action and essential to establishment and maintaining access to affected populations in situations of disaster or conflict. So there is a humanitarian imperative. The humanitarian imperative comes first. Human suffering must be addressed wherever it's found, with particular attention to the most vulnerable in the population, such as children, women, the displaced, and the elderly. So, guidelines and standards for all humanitarian actors. Now that we understand the importance of centering the humanitarian imperative, what are the specific guidelines to keep in mind while carrying out humanitarian action? There are a range of guidelines for issues that cut across different humanitarian sectors. These standards apply to everyone at all times. These guidelines have different objectives and structures. There is the global protection mainstreaming resources. There is the sphere handbook, core humanitarian standards on quality and accountability, IASC gender-based violence guidelines. There is also CP minimum standards. There is humanitarian inclusion standards. There is IASC mental health guidelines and HIV guidelines. Standards for all humanitarian actors. Global protection cluster protection mainstreaming guidance and resources. Objectives: provide humanitarian actors from different sectors with training that ensures the mainstreaming of protection principles such as safety and dignity, meaningful access, accountability, participation, and empowerment in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Structure. The structure of these guidelines includes the 4 protection mainstreaming principles. 1 of 4. Prioritize safety, dignity, and avoid causing harm. The second, out of 4, ensure meaningful access to humanitarian services in proportion to need and without any barriers. Third, out of 4, set up accountability mechanisms. And the fourth and last, ensure the participation and empowerment of affected populations. So those are the 4 protection mainstreaming principles. So let's talk about after the global protection cluster protection mainstreaming guidance and resources. Let's go to sphere project handbook. That is the second resource. Humanitarian Charter and minimum standards in humanitarian response. Objectives of this resource is to provide internationally recognized sets of common principles and universal minimum standards for the delivery of quality humanitarian response. The minimum standards cover four primary life-saving areas of humanitarian aid. So those four are: 1. Water supply, sanitation and hygiene promotion. 2. Food security and nutrition. 3. Shelter, settlement and non-food items. 4. Health action. Structure. The Sphere Handbook includes the following sections: 1. Humanitarian Charter. 2. Protection Principles. 3. Core Standards. 4. Minimum Standards in Water Supply, Sanitation and Hygiene Promotion. 5. Minimum Standards in Food Security and Nutrition. 6. Minimum Standards in Shelter, Settlement and Non-Food Items. 7. Minimum Standards in Health Action. The third resource is Core Humanitarian Standard on Quality and Accountability. Objectives: set out 9 commitments that organizations and individuals involved in humanitarian response can use to improve the quality and effectiveness of the assistance they provide. These commitments facilitate greater accountability to communities and people affected by crisis, because knowing what humanitarian organizations have committed to will enable affected populations to hold those organizations to account. Structure. The 9 commitment areas follows: 1. Humanitarian response is appropriate and relevant. 2. Humanitarian response is effective and timely. 3. Humanitarian response strengthens local capacities and avoids negative effects. 4. Humanitarian response is based on communication, participation, and feedback. 5. Complaints are welcome and addressed. 6. Humanitarian response is coordinated and complementary. 7. Humanitarian actors continuously learn and improve. 8. Staff are supported to do their jobs effectively and are treated fairly and equitably. 9. Resources are managed and used responsibly for their intended purpose. The resource number 4 is guidelines for integrating gender-based violence interventions in humanitarian action. Objectives: assist humanitarian actors and communities affected by armed conflict, natural disasters, and other humanitarian emergencies to coordinate, plan, implement, monitor, and evaluate the essential actions for the prevention and mitigation of gender-based violence (GBV) across all sectors of humanitarian response. Structure. These guidelines present strategies for the prevention and mitigation of GBV, that is gender-based violence in short. So the guidelines present strategies for the prevention and mitigation of GBV in the following areas: 1. Camp coordination and camp management. 2. Child protection. 3. Education. 4. Food security and agriculture. 5. Health. 6. Housing, land and property. 7. Humanitarian mine action. 8. Livelihoods. 9. Nutrition. 10. Protection. 11. Shelter, settlement and recovery. 12. Water, sanitation and hygiene. 13. Humanitarian operation support sectors. The resource number 5 is the minimum standards for child protection in humanitarian action. Objectives: establish common principles among those working in child protection. Strengthen coordination between child protection workers. Improve the quality of child protection programming and improve accountability within child protection work. Structure. That document is organized into 4 main groups of standards. 1. Standards to ensure a quality child protection response. 2. Standards to address child protection needs. 3. Standards to develop adequate child protection strategies. 4. Standards to mainstream child protection in other humanitarian sectors. Resource number 6. Humanitarian inclusion standards for older people and people with disabilities. Objectives: help address the gap in understanding the needs, capacities, and rights of older people and people with disabilities, and promote their inclusion in humanitarian action. Structure: 1. Identification. 2. Safe and equitable access. 3. Resilience. 4. Knowledge and participation. 5. Feedback and complaints. 6. Coordination. 7. Learning. 8. Human resources. 9. Resource management. The resource number 7 is IASC guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support in emergency settings. Objectives: enable humanitarian actors to plan, establish, and coordinate a set of minimum multi-sector responses to protect and improve people's mental health and psychosocial well-being in the midst of an emergency. There is a website, ihl-databases.icrc.org/en/. Structure: the structure has 3 levels. Level 1 is made of 3 sub-levels. So, level 1, mental health, psychosocial support, intersectoral coordination. There is also community mobilization and support on mental and health psychosocial issues, and then integrate mental health and psychosocial support in food security and nutrition. The second level, mental health and psychosocial assessment and monitoring and evaluation systems. Then integrate mental health and psychosocial support in health services, and integrate mental health and psychosocial support in shelter and site planning. The level number 3, integrate mental health psychosocial support in protection and humanitarian and human rights. Then integrate mental health and psychosocial support in education. Then integrate mental health and psychosocial support in water and sanitation. Resource number 8, IASC HIV guidelines. Objectives: help plan the delivery of a minimum set of HIV prevention, care, and support interventions to people affected by humanitarian crises. Structure: these guidelines include the following sections: raise HIV awareness and empower communities, prevent HIV transmission in healthcare settings, provide care for people with HIV-related illnesses, provide basic health care and support to key populations at higher risk of exposure to HIV, protect against HIV-related human rights violations, integrate HIV in water sanitation and hygiene programs, integrate HIV in education programs, integrate HIV in food security, nutrition, and livelihood support, integrate HIV in camp coordination and camp management, integrate HIV in shelter activities. So, the standards for protection actors, guidelines within the protection sector. There is the ICRC protection standards, the professional standards for protection work, PSPW resource. It's available on the website icrc.org. There is the Interagency Standing Committee, that is IASC, Guiding principles of unaccompanied and separated children is available on website unhcr.org. There is the Interagency Standing Committee IASC Working Group on Unaccompanied and Separated Children Field Handbook. It's available on reliefweb.int/report. Reliefweb, that is RELIEFWeb.int/report. So there is also the IASC, the Interagency Standing Committee, Operational Guidelines on Protection of Persons in Natural Disasters. There are 3 websites: ENCYSTANDINGCOMMTEE.org. Second website, RELIEFWEB.int. The third website is the Interagency Standing Committee IASC website. So another resource is Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights OHCHR Manual on Human Rights Monitoring. Another resource which we find on the same website ohchr.org is OHCHR Standard Minimum Rules SMR on treatment of prisoners. The last resource is Toolkit on Unaccompanied and Separated Children, that is available on Save the Children website. Standards for Protection Actors, ICRC Protection Standards. Organizations that cannot meet the minimum standards of the PSPW are advised not to implement protection activities. PSPW chapters, standards, guidelines, and notes. PSPW, that is the Professional Standards for Protection Work resource, is made of 7 chapters. The first 3 chapters cover overarching principles and the operational framework. The last 4 chapters look into specific technical protection issues. So you can check on the website professionalstandards.icrc.org. That is professionalstandards.icrc.org. So the PSPW is made of 45 minimum standards. The standards are the minimum obligations that all humanitarians and human rights actors undertaking protection activities must fulfill. A higher standard implemented by a given organization takes precedence and, of course, precedence. It is the responsibility of all protection actors to decide how to incorporate the standards into their own work. The PSPW is made of 15 guidelines. The guidelines constitute reference criteria that are not intended to be applied at all times by all actors. It is the responsibility of all protection actors to decide how to incorporate the guidelines into their own work. Explanatory notes. In PSPW, there are explanatory notes. They are illustrative and express, for example, the legal basis of the standards, describe the challenges that the Standards and guidelines aim to address and dilemmas they may pose to protection actors and or look into certain practical considerations. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. The next will be the module 3. We look into unit 3, the centrality of protection. Special United Nations Green Ambassador Gerard Sengiyumva, Special United Nations Green Ambassador Gerard Sengiyumva, Special United Nations Green Ambassador Gerard Sengiyumva.